So howdy, today we're going to be talking about math anxiety and executive functioning with two of our leading experts in this area. And so we have Dr. Robin Codding and Dr. Matthew Burns. Dr. Robin Codding, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure, happy to be here with you, Corey. I am here at the Northeastern University in Boston, and I am an associate professor in the school psychology program. And my work, my research that I do focuses on assessment and intervention related to math in kind of all categories, and also looking at responsiveness to math intervention.
Amazing. Dr. Matthew Burns, would you mind going next?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having us here. My name is Matt Burns. I'm a professor of special ed at the University of Missouri. And my research is using data to figure out what type of interventions kids need. And I'll freely admit that I've done more research, much more research in reading than in math. But about 10 years ago, in working with an intervention study with a teacher, special ed teacher, realized that she was using terms that I was using differently, and there were all kinds of things going on that was quite confusing to me. So I dove into some math research and have loved it ever since.
Amazing. Okay, so we're going to start with you, Robin. One ever-present conversation that we constantly see coming around is math achievement and instruction and how this relates with math anxiety. So if you don't mind, what is math anxiety? How does it develop? And what are ways teachers can do to decrease the likelihood that math anxiety is impacting students?
Sure. So for decades, we've heard concerns about how negative affect impacts math achievement. And math anxiety is one of those affective components that has been shown to have a small to moderate negative relationship with math achievement. This means that higher math anxiety is associated with lower math achievement. There's actually been 5 meta-analyses that have examined this relationship, 2 published in the 1990s and 3 in the most recent 3 years. So we have a lot of information about this relationship. The relationship exists across the lifespan. We have data from as early as first grade, and it goes through adulthood. And the strength of that relationship does vary slightly. The relationship is also consistent across diverse samples within the United States as well as other countries. In terms of what math anxiety refers to the feelings of apprehension, tension, or fear that interfere with performance on math-related tasks. Math anxiety can make it difficult to engage and solve math problems in the classroom and also in real-world situations. Math anxiety can lead to sweaty palms, rapid heartbeat, intrusive thoughts, and may result in attempts to escape or avoid math activities. One of the really important things, because we have all this information about the relationship between math anxiety and math achievement, is to understand that relationship better so that we can drive our intervention efforts. And there are several theories that I think are important for the audience to understand about this relationship. One theory suggests that poor math performance leads to higher math anxiety. That's described often as the deficit theory. Another suggests that math anxiety or cognitive worry interfere with math performance, and that's cognitive interference theory. But the evidence is really leading us to this idea that that relationship may be bidirectional or reciprocal, meaning that poor math performance and experience may lead to math anxiety and vice versa.
Yeah, so thank you so much for clarifying those 2 different theories and how there might be an actual more complicated inner relationship between those. And I know that your research team's beginning to do some work in this area. Do you mind talking a little bit about that with us?
Sure. We just finished up a meta-analysis of interventions that address math anxiety. We found that for math anxiety outcomes, the therapeutic type approaches like relaxation, breathing, and other cognitive behavioral approaches yielded a small to moderate effect size, but had no impact on math outcomes. Interestingly, remediating math skills directly had a moderate effect, of course, on math outcomes. We would expect that, and also a small effect on math anxiety outcomes. One of the challenges, though, with this particular analysis is that there are a few studies that have directly compared therapeutic interventions, math skill remediation interventions, a combined approach, and a control. So that research is needed. But based on these findings, it's significant that we do need to address both math anxiety and remediate math skills. And we can do that by addressing math motivation during frequent opportunities to engage in math tasks, and ensuring that those math tasks that we're engaging in are promoting both accurate and fluent math performance.
This might be getting a little bit down in the weeds, so feel free to tell me to be quiet. But did you notice any challenges with trying to measure math anxiety across those studies that you reviewed?
So one of the meta-analyses that I was referring to earlier, let me just I'm going to get stuck because I want to tell you the name. It is Baruso et al. In 2021. They actually looked at all of the different types of math anxiety scales that have been utilized. And they found for children, it did not make a difference. This relationship didn't vary depending on the math anxiety measure used for children. But for youth, secondary level students, there was some variability in the type of measure used, with one item tools not performing as well as some of the other tools that are available. So that meta-analysis specifically focused on that. In our meta-analysis, virtually everyone used the same type of tool.
Yeah, one of the things I'll hunt down this reference and include it in the transcript for this. But in one of the recent studies I was looking at, they were looking at the timing of the math anxiety measure and whether they did it immediately before the task or immediately at the completion of the math task, and looking at whether that impacted the scoring of math anxiety for students and how that would actually dictate research, but then potentially indicate like, well, why would math anxiety perhaps be lower at the completion of the task than before the task? And anyway, I think some of that is interesting and would guide our understanding of this phenomenon further. Matt, I don't know if you have anything to add on to this related to math anxiety.
No, the only thing I'll add to that is there's some thinking around the idea that if a child has math anxiety, you want to stay away from things like time tests and practicing math facts to automaticity, et cetera, because when a child becomes anxious, they can't access working memory as well. And that's true. But if a child is anxious, I would argue, with math, having them practice math until it becomes the point of automaticity means that when they need to access that information to solve a problem, they can bypass working memory. So when a child struggles with anxiety while doing math, one of the best things, in my opinion, you can do is, as Robin's already said, is those things that have them practice and practice and practice to the point of getting to automaticity is really a helpful activity. Great.
And Matt, so the next question I have for you, I have one word: executive functioning. What is it? What is its relationship with predicting math achievement? And then what are some instructional practices teachers can use that might be able to compensate for executive functioning performance?
Okay. Yeah, executive functioning, that's like the big word right now. It actually has been for a few years. Actually, about 2010 was when it really started to become popular. And it's used differently by different people. Generally speaking, it involves a kid's ability to direct behavior towards a goal, right? Planning, focusing attention, remembering, et cetera. It's usually focused around 4 kind of areas, but 3 or 4 depending on who you ask: working memory, mental flexibility, self-control, which includes things like emotional control, planning, organizing, self-monitoring, inhibition. All those things fit in the category of executive function. So it's defined different ways. It's measured differently, different ways. So you asked a question about how do you measure math anxiety? Well, you measure executive function, all kinds of different ways. And sometimes people just assess aspects of it. So it is believed to help people complete tasks, but its relationship to math is not quite as clear. A great meta-analysis on this, Jacob and Parkinson in 2015, they use the 4-component definition of response inhibition, attention control, attention shifting, flexibility, and working memory. They looked at 67 studies over 15,000 participants. 60 of those studies looked at math, and the average correlation between executive functioning and math was 0.31. By the way, it's 0.30 for reading. Mm-hmm. So this idea that's more closely related to math, the data don't really hold that up. I looked at all kinds of different things. The age of the kids really didn't matter. It was 0.29 for the young kids, 3 to 5 years old, to 0.33 for adolescents. Type of executive function didn't matter. 0.27 for attention control, 0.31 for response inhibition, 0.31, about 0.3, roughly 0.3 or so. Attention control was lower though. Didn't predict future learning, a correlation to future learning of 0.3 and a correlation to concurrent learning 0.29. And then they concluded also there was a limited evidence for causal link. Now that's not correlation. They looked at the actual research and said there was limited evidence for a causal link between executive function and achievement. Some people come to me and say, is executive function related to math? Well, of course it is. I mean, yes, most things like that are cognitive measures, cognitive processes, et cetera, are related to achievement. Of course they are. But the idea of using that as an intervention to address a math deficit is a bit problematic. For example, look at all the research around work around executive function, 2 studies, St. Clair Thompson, Gather-Cole, 2006, and Vander et al., 2011, both found that working memory was the aspect of executive function that predicted math the best. So we did a couple studies on that, looking at the relationship between working memory and math. And we found a relationship between working memory and math among kids with low math skills was only 0.29. So again, not zero, but not, not a large relationship. And when you did an intervention that was very memory oriented, so, practice math facts, et cetera, which is the thing that people talk about as being really a problem. When you do that, memory, working memory and short-term memory accounted for 34% of the variance in how many facts kids retained when you use just like basic fact drill. Mm-hmm. But when you switch using effective practice, we used incremental rehearsal, for which there's 40 studies on it, probably 10, 15 of them are for math. Memory, working memory and short-term memory only accounted for 2% of the variance of retention of math facts. So when you use effective approaches, it reduces the influence. So if a child is struggling, if you think there's an executive function issue, my advice is not to intervene for executive function, because that doesn't really generalize to math very well, but to intervene with effective instructional approaches for math. And I can talk more about some ideas around that if you'd like.
Yeah, it makes me think about, there's other instructional ways we can go about doing that, right? We can reduce set size, we can increase exposures, change dosage rates of how often we're practicing math facts, the number of minutes, and all of those things would be much more worth teachers' time than trying to intervene directly on executive functioning, expecting some magical thing to occur. So Robin, I didn't know if you had anything to add on to that related to executive functioning.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just said what I was gonna say. There's a lot of things that we can do to intensify or adjust instruction if we are worried about how students are responding to our practices, that will sort of mitigate that cognitive load and even address language load, which people are often concerned about. And those ideas that you just mentioned are some of the main ones. Christian Dobler and his colleagues, and they articulated this in an article, Smith et al., 2016. Have talked about how just using explicit systematic instruction is one of the best ways to address concerns that potentially working memory is at play with students with math learning disabilities. And, again, going back to what Matt said, that has everything to do with just engaging in explicit, unambiguous practices that include careful sequencing of skill building activities, scaffolded instructional supports, providing frequent review and practice, allowing lots of times for processing, rehearsing new information, having visual aids, using specific feedback so students don't learn misconceptions. So these good instructional practices are really the important way to address these issues.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, y'all. This was awesome. And I look forward to our webinar where people will be able to ask questions.